The writing world is full of advice, and most of it is about the reader, the market, the agent. They often tell you to think about your audience from day one, and I'm going to be honest, for a first-time fantasy novelist, I think that is some of the worst advice you can get. Because that pressure is what leads to burnout and half-finished manuscripts. If you ask me, the real magic happens when you ignore all of that. So this video is about a different path. It's about writing your novel as if no one will ever read it, and why that is the secret to creating something with real emotional depth. I'll show you how to use your story to figure out what you truly want to say. But when you are ready for an audience, you have a story that actually matters. So how do we actually do this? We start with the biggest piece on the board, the world itself. Because whether you realize it or not, the rules you create for your world are often secretly the rules you believe in for ours. Let me start with a simple thought experiment here. Imagine two different fantasy cities. The first is Aethelgard, a city of gleaming silver spires where every citizen is provided for. The streets here are perfectly clean and law is absolute. There are guards on every corner and the city gates lock at sundown. Now, the second city then is Port Scrim, a chaotic tangle of rickety docks and taverns where anyone can make a fortune or lose their life in the same night. Here there are no laws to speak of, only deals and debts. Now which city feels more right to you? Which one would you rather write about? You see, there's no wrong answer really, but your gut reaction is the first clue. It's a glimpse into your own internal operating system, which is exactly what I mean when I say your world is a mirror. It reflects your own assumptions about how things should work. This is the first and most powerful step in writing for yourself, realizing that every choice you make about your world's present moment is an exploration of your own values, whether you do it consciously or subconsciously. You aren't just creating a setting, you are building a philosophical sandbox to play in. The process of deciding how your societies function forces you to take a stand. For example, think about the classic fantasy races. Maybe in your world you have orcs who are a force of pure chaos. They ransack villages and kill for sport. That choice establishes a moral baseline for evil. But the more revealing choice is what you do with your good or wise races. Do your elves live in perfect harmony with nature, representing an incorruptible ideal? Or are they just as capable of strip mining a forest for profit, suggesting that the potential for greed exists in everyone, not just the monsters? The choice you make about your elves in contrast to your orcs is in this example a direct statement on your view of wisdom, corruption, and civilization itself. Now, how do you apply all this? Well, just start with a single question about one of your societies. For instance, how do they treat outsiders? Do they welcome them with open arms, seeing them as a source of new ideas and trade? Or do they view them with suspicion as a threat to their stability and traditions? Once you make a choice, ask the next logical question. Why? Maybe they're welcoming because their own history is one of migration and they value empathy. Or maybe they are suspicious because a past encounter with outsiders led to a devastating plague and their caution is a form of cultural scar tissue. Each answer you provide isn't just lore, it's you, articulating your own ideas about trust, community, and fear. I remember when I was building a society for one of my own stories, I decided they had a custom where they never said goodbye, only journey well. When I asked myself why, I realized it was because their history was filled with so much loss and unexpected departures that they created a culture built on the hope of reunion, not the finality of separation. I didn't know I was exploring that theme until the world building showed it to me. What I'm talking about here is taking the vague feelings in your head and turning them into concrete rules of a society. This is why you don't need to worry about an audience at this stage. You are the audience. You are figuring out what you find interesting, what you find just, and what you find compelling. You're basically building the foundation of your worldview one brick at a time, because in your world, you are not bound by the reality of our world. Here, only what you determine right or wrong actually manifests. But having said that, a world isn't just a snapshot of the present, of course. It's a living thing shaped by the weight of its past. And the story you decide to tell about that past reveals even more about you than the present ever could. Now, I think a lot of aspiring writers fall into the trap of thinking that lore is just a long list of dates, kings, and battles. They'll spend weeks creating a detailed timeline for the world, but a timeline isn't a story. It's just a collection of facts. The real magic to me, the part that reveals something about you, is in the narratives you weave from those facts. Consider the example of two historians looking at the fall of an ancient empire. One historian points to the assassination of the last emperor and says it all happened right there. The choice of one man brought down a 1,000-year dynasty. But the other historian shakes her head and points to the decades of famine leading up to it, the failing trade routes, the slow exhaustion of the mines. He says the emperor was just the final domino to fall, the empire was already hollow. Those are two completely different stories based on the exact same event, which is what I call weaving on the loom of lore. The historical facts are your threats, but the pattern you create with them, the story you choose to tell about why things happened, that reveals what you believe truly shapes a world. This is the next layer of your worldview. It's not just about what your world is, but how it became that way. The story you would tell about your past is a powerful statement about how you believe change actually happens. So how do you figure out what kind of pattern you're weaving? I find it helpful to think of it in terms of two primary threads. The first one is the great hero thread. This is the belief that history is driven by singular powerful individuals, such as a paranoid king, a revolutionary mage, or the well-known prophesized chosen one. In the great hero thread, it is their personal choices, flaws, and ambitions that represent the engines of change. The world turns because they act. The alternative then is the great force thread. This is the belief that history is driven by larger impersonal forces. Think about things like climate change, economic collapse, technological shifts, or mass social movements. In this view, even the most powerful king is just a product of his time, reacting to forces much bigger than himself. You can see this difference in some of the biggest fantasy stories out there. The Lord of the Rings, for example, in my opinion, is a story driven by the great hero thread. The choices of Frodo, Aragorn, and Gandalf are what ultimately shape the fate of the world. But a story like A Song of Ice and Fire leans heavily on the great force thread. Even the most powerful characters like Daenerys or Jon Snow are constantly struggling against massive impersonal forces like political inertia, the coming of winter, or the weight of centuries of history. They are often more like products of their world than the sole drivers of it. Now, most worlds will have a bit of both, but I'd argue that every story usually has a dominant thread. Your task as the architect of your world is to decide which one is the primary driver. Is your 1,000-year war the result of one king's insult? Or was it the inevitable result of two empires competing for the same dwindling resources? The answer here again isn't for your reader, at least not yet. At this point in time, it's purely for you because it's another piece of your own philosophy clicking into place. Once you understand the grand forces that shape your world, you can start to explore how those forces crash into the life of a single solitary person, your protagonist. And that's where the story truly begins. This is where your world stops being a thought experiment and starts becoming something tangible. Because the way I see it, a story isn't about what happens to your characters, it's about what they do about it. And the choices they make are the final, most personal piece of your worldview. Consider a made-up character, a young city guard named Garen. He discovers that his captain, a man he respects and admires, is secretly smuggling life-saving medicine out of their quarantined city to sell on the black market. The medicine is desperately needed inside the walls, but the captain is using the money to support the families of guards who have died from the plague. Now Garen has a choice here. He can report his captain, upholding the law and ensuring the medicine stays in the city, but doing so condemns the families his captain is trying to save. Or he can stay silent, becoming complicit in a crime but allowing that support to continue. This is what I call the crucible of choice. It's a moment where two deeply held, valid beliefs, in this case uphold the law versus protect your own, are put in direct opposition. There is no easy answer, and to write this scene with any real weight, you, the writer, has to step into that crucible yourself. You have to be able to make a passionate, convincing argument for both sides of the decision. You have to feel the pull of loyalty to the captain and his efforts against the simultaneous horror of his crime. This is the process that bridges the gap between a cool idea and a story with emotional depth. When you find yourself stuck rewriting the same chapter over and over because it feels shallow, it's often because you haven't put your character and yourself into a true crucible. You've given them a problem, not a dilemma. A problem has a solution. A dilemma only has consequences that demand a deeper evaluation. The most powerful moments in fantasy are born from dilemmas. It's Frodo at the crack of doom, where his choice isn't just destroy the evil thing, but to fight against his own corrupted desire to keep the ring that has become a part of him. It's also Jaime Lannister choosing whether to uphold his sacred oath to protect a mad king, or to break that oath to save a city full of innocent people. These choices feel real, and it's unlikely they were made by writers who didn't take the time to wrestle with these choices themselves. So how do you create your own crucible? Well, start with your character's core identity. What is the one thing they believe in most? Now create a situation where that core belief is forced into conflict with something else they value, like their loyalty to a friend or their compassion for the suffering. The choice shouldn't be between right or wrong. The choice should be between two different kinds of right. That is the heart of a compelling character. And as you explore that conflict, as you force yourself to see the logic and emotion on both sides, you're not just plotting a chapter, you're discovering what you truly believe about duty, loyalty, and what it means to be a good person in a broken world. Now with that said, I've shown you the path to a journey into the depths of yourself. But what does that all really add up to? What have you actually created at the end of all this? Well, in my opinion, you've created a blueprint. A blueprint of your own worldview made solid and real through the act of creation. And this is where we come back to the fear that I talked about at the very beginning of this video. The fear of the audience, the agent, the publisher. The fear that if your book isn't a bestseller, then all that time was wasted. I want you to understand that this is a lie. It's a lie that the industry tells, and it's a lie too many writers tell themselves. It's a lie that paralyzes too many people with amazing stories to tell. So I want you to let go of the pressure of publication. Forget the agents and the audience for a moment. That novel you were afraid to write because it might not get published, it might never have been for them. Maybe it's just for you. That book, whether it sits on a bestseller list or on a hard drive, is the artifact left behind after a successful journey of self-excavation. It is the physical proof that you took the time to explore what you believe, to wrestle with difficult questions, and to build something from nothing. The biggest reward in this entire process isn't any book deal, it's the clarity you forged for yourself along the way. It's the confidence that comes from knowing what you want to say. And here's the beautiful irony. When you finally do write a story that is so authentically and unapologetically you, without worrying about what the market wants, that is often when you create something that an audience truly connects with. So take your ideas, take your maps and your characters, and start building your world. Create a story. Do it for the joy of creation, for the thrill of discovery. Write the story only you can write. And I promise you, you will already have received one of the biggest rewards a creative life can offer. And if you're feeling that spark right now, then don't let it go to waste. Instead, watch this video here next where I outline an entire fantasy novel from scratch step by step, using the same emotion first framework I used for my own story.